Well, hello and welcome to the Digital Orthodontist Live. This is the first and only live podcast for orthodontists. Still, that is true. I'm your host, Dr. Kyle Fagala, and tonight I'm coming to you from, and I have a big underline because I didn't know where I was going to be coming to you from. At this exact moment, I was supposed to be, well, originally in Memphis, and then winter weather was coming in, Winter Storm Cora, I think it's called. And so then I was going to fly to Dallas a day early for an event I got to be at that also Shannon's going to be at. So then there was a moment where we're like, well, maybe we'll do it together in person there. She was originally going to be in Memphis. All that to say, because I know this is very exciting information for you to know, I'm not in Dallas. In fact, I watched my phone and the American Airlines app all day long, only to discover that I was not going to fly anywhere. I was delayed 20 minutes about 20 times until I was rudely canceled for the flight. And so I'm supposed to be on a flight tomorrow, and we'll see. So in the South, we are good at some things, frying foods being one of them, but handling snow, not one of them. But the show must go on. Okay, so here we are virtually. Shannon, I can see her back there. You can't see her, but here, hold on just real quick. There she is. Okay. Yeah, she's there. Okay, don't worry. But we'll get her on here in a second. But tonight, we're going to talk about 2024 Wrapped, and we're going to talk trends and then predictions for 2025. And so I cannot predict the future. I can't do it. Neither can you. But we certainly, I think, can use the data that's available to us, historical trends that we know, and this can help us map out a path to success. And so I think conversations like these, they start with being honest about the current orthodontic market. It may not be the overflowing cup that it was maybe the year or two following COVID, especially from like a new patient perspective and a starts perspective. But I do think that with the right understanding of current trends, I think we can all get back on track. And maybe you're crushing it, maybe you're doing great. But if you've had a bad year or two, I think tonight's discussion is for you. And if you've been crushing it, hey, this is a discussion for you as well. I do, before I get started and before I bring Shannon Patterson on, who is an industry insider and expert and a good friend, I want to share a quick message from tonight's sponsor, Neon Canvas, because I would not be doing this without their generous support and the help of the team there. Neon and Shannon was supposed to be at our offices, and hey, what can you do? But Neon Canvas is the premier digital marketing agency for orthodontists with an all US-based team of over 60 experts in every aspect of digital marketing, SEO, branding, web design, and more. They'll help you thrive in 2025 and beyond. Check them out at neoncanvas.com or neoncanvas.com/audit, where you can schedule a free digital marketing consultation today. I suggest that you do. All right, Shannon, are you ready for your introduction? I hope so. Let me bring you on. There she is.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
It's good. How are you?
Doing great. Again, as I alluded to in the intro, this could have been cooler. We could have been there for a moment. I was going to book a room at the Ritz-Carlton and spend the day at the spa tomorrow. And
I know.
Not disappointed to be in Memphis with my family, but it's one of those things like when you're thinking you're going to travel and you don't travel, kind of the worst. So here we are.
Yeah. And my flight just got canceled for tomorrow, so it keeps going on. So
fantastic. Gotta love flying when you can't get where you're trying to get. So and totally a first world problem, I accept. But and I guess I would say too, like in the spirit of kind of what's going on in the world, we were talking before we got on here about LA and the fires and just really terrible situation that's going on there. I've not heard yet of any orthodontists who've been affected, either homes or practices, but I think, looking at it, there's a good chance it's affected somebody. So I think all we can say is we are praying. I think with a group like the Digital Orthodontist or the other groups we got in Facebook, in the past we had like the floods in Houston, and there was support and kind of groups coming together to raise money for Ian Healy, who I went to residency with. He went to UT. He had really terrible tragedy there with the floods. So if something like that's happened, I would like to think that the community will circle around those people and help them. So hopefully everyone's safe. And if you got any knowledge of someone that's going through some stuff, share it in the group, and we'd love to all come together and support them. So yeah. All right. So on with the introduction. You have to do the introduction. So Shannon Patterson, she knows this about herself, but she's a partner with Benson Koppel, Patterson and Associates. Ooh, I like that Patterson in there. That's great. And she's a leading consultant in the orthodontic industry. She works with orthodontists throughout the United States on the business aspects of the practice, and she specializes in practice and career transitions. She's also a Colby certified consultant and an expert in the Colby suite of assessments that focuses on strength-based relationships to help teams and practices reach their full potential. I'm actually a big fan of the Colby test. Really early on, I took the Colby test, and it's helped me kind of understand personality. It's the first personality test that I really dove into, so it has a place in my heart. Beyond that, Shannon is a member of the American Academy of Medical Management. She serves on a committee with the AAO, and she regularly contributes to numerous orthodontic journals. She's also, if you've ever been to any orthodontic meeting, you may have seen her speak. She lectures all over the place: AAO, regional meetings, orthodontic resident programs, study clubs, user meetings, really anything that's got a microphone and a slide deck, she does it. So simply put, she has a wealth of knowledge about where our industry is headed and how best to prepare for it. So again, thank you for joining us. This is where I was going to ask you, what do you think of Memphis? Did you like the barbecue? But yeah,
I know.
didn't work. Maybe next time. Maybe next time. Have you been to Memphis before?
Yes, and I love, I think it's Central Barbecue.
Yeah,
Is that right?
that's one of the big ones. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah.
Okay. I don't, but it's okay. Just kidding. What's funny is
Well,
I
I'm
live
from Alabama. I love Dreamland the best, but yeah.
Okay. But Alabama has that white barbecue sauce. Not a fan.
Well, yeah, Dreamland doesn't, but yes, it's more like probably like it's Memphis sauce.
Every area has their
Yeah.
little thing, and I think white sauce was sort of a mistake. But anyway,
Yeah.
we'll let it go. Yeah, come back. What's funny is I live in Memphis. I don't just love barbecue, which is a weird conversation for another
Wow.
day. But I found that it's not a popular sentiment to share, so I try not to share it if I can. I will implore all those in the chat. We have a good little group building up on a Thursday night. If you have questions about 2024 and 2025, you can trust we have a script that's got all kinds of cool stuff and questions, but please engage, interact, and we will include your questions. So it always makes it better if you want to engage. So let's get started. I even have little titles. Ta-da.
All right.
2024 in review. What happened and why? So let's look at the big picture of 2024. Not exactly my favorite year. It just seems like life was super busy. Practice stuff was actually okay, but I think throughout the year, and our year started off pretty rocky. My general sentiment, in asking people in different months, how are you doing? Oh, we're not doing great. Was that practices were down. My sort of sense, and you and I both, I think, review a lot of different stuff, talk to a lot of different people. You more than me, but my guesstimate would be practices were down a few percentage points. Adult new patient starts seem to be, by all kind of sources, down. And then I think also there's the issue with just continued staffing issues, finding good staff, keeping good staff. I think marginally speaking, staff expenses have gone up a significant amount since COVID. So I guess taking all that at a glance, what's your take on the past year's biggest developments, and what's the reason for those?
Yeah, so great question. And it was kind of a crazy year. Everyone was really worried about patient acquisition. It was really hard to get new patients in. I think through the year end, there were really only 5 months that had some positive, upticks on new patient flow and things like that. Conversions were up a little bit, probably because new patient exams were down. But overall, when the numbers come in from OrthoFi Engage, which is a very small reflection of the industry, so we love that data, but it doesn't represent everybody. And I think those groups tend to do a little bit better because obviously they're looking at their analytics and they're cognizant of what's going on in their practices. It showed that practices were up, but starts were actually down. But just talking to multiple orthodontists throughout the year, I mean, it just wasn't a great year. I would say that practices, overall, if you piled them all together, I would say, 5 to 7% down. Some more. I mean, I had some doctors call me and say they were 20% down. I had other doctors call me and say they were 20% up. But it was a really interesting, tidbit to look and see that production was up, but starts were down, and kind of why does that happen?
Yeah. So why does that happen?
Well,
Why do you
probably
think?
because of add-on services. So,
Okay.
things like retainer insurance, whitening. I know some people increase their fees, but I think a lot of people that did, especially retainer insurance, really, had an uptake. I have one friend, I think he was up, overall like 20% because of that. I mean, selling, retainer insurance on the front end, $800, a case, consider helped quite a bit. So I
Yeah.
think that's probably why. And I also think, and I hope that everyone, increases their fees every year. You should be doing that. It's, January 10th, I think, or 9th. I can't remember
Yeah.
what day it
Not
is.
not too late.
The
9.
9th. So yeah, so everyone, it's funny, pre-COVID, no one raised their fees for years. And we don't know why. It was just no one ever did. Everyone was always scared about raising their fees because someone else wouldn't raise their fees. But it's really healthy to raise your fees. I mean, insurance reimbursements and things like that, they're based on fees. And if everyone's not raising their fees, that's why the insurance reimbursements don't go up and things like that. So it's something everyone should be doing every year, raising their fees 3 to 5%.
Yeah. No, I agree. We did that this past year, and it is January 9th, and we've not done it for this year, but it's on my list of things to do. It's just I've been trying to survive this year, already,
Yeah.
the 9 days that have been this year. I do think that, let's see, retainer insurance, that has been a sort of slow burn. I remember people talking about that 7, 8 years ago, and Pro
Hmm.
Ortho, and then, Fishbine Fundamentals has made that a big kind of tent post topic,
Hmm.
and all the Facebook groups talk about it, but it does sometimes take a little while for people to kind of get around and to do it. So
Right.
it is a great source of additional income. And I think the big objections to that have always been, well, it just feels like I'm taking advantage of someone. But what we found is that patients really do want it and like it and appreciate
Hmm.
it. And that it solves one
Yeah.
of the biggest issues with at least teenagers and their parents is when a teenager has not worn their retainers or they have lost their retainers, it eliminates that like anger from the 4 to 5 or
Yeah.
$600 replacement. So
Right.
I think it's a good thing. And the reality is, like, we shouldn't be ashamed of where we can add value and be paid for it. I mean, it is, we're healthcare
Absolutely.
providers. And so it's
Yes.
interesting how there's certain sacred cows in our, we charge $5,800 or whatever it may be for a case. And it's this very arbitrary number that's not necessarily based on the ins and outs of the treatment. It's like our mild, medium, and severe. Whereas, like, you take your car into a shop, they're not going to say, well, this is like a moderate problem. This is severe. It's based on all the
Right.
different stuff they're going to do. So I sometimes wonder, and I know there's groups like Hummingbird, kind of famously has a bunch of different fees, and that's probably a more sophisticated way to do it. And maybe that's too complicated for some. I don't know. But I was looking at a case the other day. It was like going to be 2 implants and extractions and all this kind of mess. And I was thinking, I can't charge enough for this thing. So I think the long and short of it is you don't have to complicate things, but I do think fees can go up. I think, we can stretch payments. There's, more sophisticated ways to approach it, but retainer plan, $600, $800 for that is a great thing. We've added
Hmm.
actually oral surgery services inside our practice, a
Okay.
day every other month, and that's added some production. And then, sort of as you alluded to, you're talking about adult treatment. I kind of want to get into that you're talking about how new patients are down, but conversion is up. But at the end of the year, maybe production is up, but starts are about the same. Like that kind of an experience, which is honestly kind of similar to ours. We have milked more production out of raising fees, out of optimizing about, by adding
Hmm.
add-ons and things like that, which is a smarter way to hit a production goal. You don't want to work harder. You want to work smarter. Um,
Right.
why do you think fewer adults are seeking treatment? I think that's like $1 million question. Like what's going on?
Sure. I think I definitely think the economy played a part in it, right? So, I think that people just weren't spending, nobody wanted an extra monthly payment. Interest rates were high, everyone's credit card rates were higher, things like that. I do think, and I haven't said this a whole lot because I'm doing a lot of research on it. I do think the GLP drugs are kind of playing a role in it. I think, personally, I have so many friends that have done that. And that's, $1,000 a month. And people, there's a lot of people going to spas and different things and getting that. But when adults are seeking treatment, they're not really shopping against orthodontists, right? So you're not really competing with orthodontists for adult patients. You're really competing for other elective services that they might be getting. And I think maybe they're just spending their money in other avenues. But I also think, I do think, there's some more general dentists doing some limited treatment options. And I don't think not every ortho out there is comfortable doing limited treatment. But when we think about adult patients, 70% of them are retreats. And,
Mm.
if their dentist tells them, hey, I can treat this case, it's going to be $3,500. And the patient says, well, I want to go, to this, I should go to an orthodontist and just see. And they're going to tell them, well, they're going to do the same thing that I'm going to do, but it's going to cost them, they're going to charge you $6,000 to do it. And then they come to your office, and that's actually exactly how it plays out. They come in and you talk about the same treatment with aligners, and it is, twice the cost. And so I think that people really have to think about that. If somebody really wants limited treatment options, can you provide that? Is your office offering that? And if not, is that something that you can consider? When we look at Smile Direct Club, I mean, they had 15 to 18,000 patients starting a month. It did bring a whole new demographic to the table of people that wanted to seek treatment, but just didn't want to pay a super high case fee, and really just probably wanted, people call it touch up, retreat, all kinds of things. But I do think there's definitely more general dentists doing that. But I think the economy was probably the biggest factor.
Okay. I actually like that idea about the weight loss drugs. It's kind of a funny thing to think about because, you can get Zepbound now for $550 a month. Well, $550 every 4 weeks, so ish. And,
Yeah.
I'm on that. I've been kind of public about that. I'd hit a weight that I was like, oh my gosh. And I went to my doctor for like an annual physical 2 years ago now. And he was like, well, there is this like new kind of experimental drug type. And he sort of described it. And I was only familiar about it because the Kardashians, there was a story about them, I think late December of what would have been 22, I guess, about how they were on Ozempic, at the time. And so I was like, yeah, I've kind of
Hmm.
heard about that. And he's like, well, I got a lot of doctor friends that are on it. And, early case studies are really good. And, is that something you would try? Like, would you take a drug if it would help you lose weight? And I was like, without a doubt. Are you
Yeah.
kidding? Like some people are kind of like wary of it. I'm like, absolutely. Where can I sign up? And at that time it was about $1,100. And so now it's $550 every 4 weeks, which is not a small amount. And I think you talk about that with someone whose maybe annual income is $100,000. That's a sizable amount of
Yes,
their annual income. So
absolutely.
at the same time, losing 10, 15, 20, 50, 60 pounds. I mean, people have lost a ton of weight on it.
Yes,
Um, you can't really put a price tag on that. And I love straight teeth and beautiful smiles, but losing 20 pounds, kind of hard to beat, right? So
absolutely.
I get it. So basically, we just need legislation quickly to screw over the drug companies to reduce the price of those drugs such that people can get back to the orthodontist. I think there's always this like boogeyman about election years and the effect that it has on the
Yes.
economy. And I don't know if we talk about it here or not, but let's just go ahead and talk about just inflation for what it's worth. It seems like the inflationary moment of last year was as bad as it's been in my lifetime.
Hmm.
And, I am like shocked and I start to sound like my grandpa as I go to Taco Bell. And I'm like, I remember I could get a whole bag of burritos for $10. And it's literally like $15 for some nacho fries and a side of rice or something. It's pretty wild. So I don't know where my question's going to land, except just to say, let's talk a little bit the whole like election year thing. Do you think that's a real thing? Is that just like a fabricated thing? And then maybe just a little bit more on inflation. Do we feel like that's going to improve? Do you feel like that was a big part of it? I mean, you said it was the economy. I guess that's what you mean by when you say that, but
Yes, I mean, I think hey, prices are so high. Inflation is not the problem; it's prices, right? So it raises prices, and rarely do those prices really come back down. On fixed goods. I mean, gas and energy and things like that might come down, but you're not going to see groceries, and some other goods come down. So things are just much more expensive for consumers, and so their budget is tight. But election years absolutely play a role in the economy.
but
I think a lot of
their belt's not tight. I had to get that joke in there. Their belt is loose
that's
now. They have to
right.
get new
That's right.
pants, and they have to pay for the new pants. Yes, go ahead.
That's right. Hey, I'll say this about GLP drugs. I read an article the other day that said in a couple of years, the GLP drugs are going to be 1% of our GDP. I
Okay, there
mean,
we go.
it's big. So, that is going to continue to grow. But yes, I think it's prices, but the election year definitely played a factor in it. I think there was just a lot of uncertainty, especially, with businesses, a lot of different kind of regulations were possibly going to change.
Sure.
There were a lot of layoffs this year, even in our industry. I mean, we saw
Yep.
probably close to 20 orthodontists get laid off this year that were being paid really, a lot of money. Probably when you get that high as an associate, you probably should question, do I really have job security here?
Yep.
But I think there was probably more layoffs out there than anybody realized, probably as
Well,
well.
there's some big companies that sort of famously had some restructuring, some
Yes.
layoffs and some things, and that's just kind of the way of business. But yeah, it did happen in this calendar year. So, well, let's kind of move on from that. I did want to say that David Shannon kind of added to what you said is that are fewer adults starting treatment, or are fewer adults starting treatment in orthodontic practices and instead starting in general practices? And you did lean into that, and I don't really have like the solution for that. I think that's probably true. I mean, general dentists are largely the gatekeepers on adult patients. And
Hmm.
so, we're in this kind of weird place where we're supposed to kind of help general dentists. Like they ask for help. I mean, they'll ask me to like finish cases sometimes. They'll ask me to like look at a clin check. Or, I've got one, I shouldn't say this on a public podcast, but I've had one kind of come by to let me look at their kid and, kind of ask for some advice. And I'm always like a little bit shocked by the lack of sort of fundamental understanding of orthodontics. And it shouldn't surprise me because like if they asked me to like talk about how to make an implant, connect to a crown or something, like I probably wouldn't know either. So maybe that's fair. But it's clear to those of us in this industry, well, orthodontists should do the work. And, maybe you're saving a little bit of money. It's usually not half. I think they'll kind of use that terminology. And a lot of times I'll be shocked at how much they actually charge. And then they'll do it in two payments. And so in a lot of senses, it's far less affordable. But let's jump into that really quick. I don't know if this is like coming later in the podcast. I'm off the script now, but let's talk about GPs and the amount in the last calendar year, maybe in the face of economic struggles, that they started trying to seek aligner, profitability and things like that. You think that's a
Yes.
big part of the story for this past year? What can we do about it?
I do. Yes, and I think in 2008 and 9 we saw the same thing, and I think when we come out of this and the economy is a little bit better, and people, have more disposable income, I think that they might get away from that because I don't think they enjoy doing it. It's hard, right? But
Mm.
technology is also advanced. I mean, they can offer limited treatment. There's even some, structured groups out there that kind of have a lot of their GPs submitting the cases, and
Yeah.
orthodontists are on the back scene, doing the clin checks. So I think there's probably a lot more GPs out there doing treatment than people realize. Different, there's a lot of cross reference on that, but I would say up to 70% of GPs are offering some form
Yeah.
of orthodontic treatment, mainly with aligners. The bigger factor there, and I know that somebody put this in the question under one of your advertisements, is really, pediatric dentists really starting to do more. And when we see some of the demographic changes that are coming,
Mhm.
with the population trends and changes with less births, we're going to start feeling that this year. Everyone always thinks, well, I don't feel that where I'm at. Well, you're going to start feeling it this year because it's been a steady decline. But probably more and more pediatric dentists are going to start doing in-house ortho, or have an in-house orthodontist do their ortho. So that was probably another big phone call we got this year. Was my best referral just hired an orthodontist. The biggest pediatric group in town just sold, and that company has an orthodontist. So it is important to diversify your referral base. And the other statistic that's out there is a lot of people think, well, I don't really want to help this GP do aligner therapy, but a lot of times the GP that's doing the most aligners is actually your biggest referral, because they do it enough to know what they can't treat, and so they'll
Yeah.
send them out. So people have to make their own decisions on that. But if people are around you doing it, you guys are specialists, but I don't think that, it's really necessarily advocated enough. I mean, show them the difficult cases that you do. When you're just trying to do the same work that they're doing and just limited treatment, they don't understand it. But when you show them what you can do and what you should do, I think that they will still refer to you.
Yeah, and then some of them aren't very good people, so I don't know that anything's gonna compel them or speak to their greater nature or their better nature. Yeah,
Right.
there's a lot to unpack there. Wow. You brought up the pediatric dentistry thing. There is a certain large aligner company that is obviously focusing a lot of their effort on the pediatric dental market. It's a big market.
Hmm.
It's largely untapped. They are the gatekeepers of adolescence, increasingly so,
Yeah.
and that's scary, especially as that part of our industry heads more and more into the OSO realm. And I say it's scary because as that happens, I think it's more ensured that they will enter into sort of high producing activities like orthodontics, because why wouldn't they? Or they'll gobble up orthodontists or orthodontic practices or people to do their orthodontic services, because
Hmm.
it makes sense from a profitability standpoint and a production standpoint. And that sucks, you know? And I think what sucks about it, and I use that term because it's a very elevated term, is in a perfect world, the people who are best qualified to do certain treatments are the ones doing it. And that's just not how
Yes.
a free market is. It's the more compelling story and the ease to which someone can get you to buy is the greater lever than the expertise or the ability to do something greater. And so the fact that they have the captive audience, that being the pediatric dentist or the general dentist, it sets them up way more easily to secure that sale. And as technology makes it seemingly more and more easy to do those treatments,
Hmm.
and so we're gonna, very soon have not even having to like fill the attachment template. We already have that with Solventum's attachments, but
Hmm.
that will soon be with the companies that are more focused on general dentists and pediatric dentists, and so that takes away another barrier of entry. We already have, early treatment, let's call it, for aligners, and we have early expanders, and these kind of things. And I'm not
Hmm.
trying to like wave a big like white flag here because I think we can still compete against it, but it does come down to storytelling in your market, and unfortunately, you kind of have to like speak out of both sides of your mouth. I think with general dentists because they're still a big source of referrals, and at the same time, it's hard to not want to help them on some level because they may screw up the case if you don't. And you do also want to endear yourself to them.
Right.
And so it is just complicated. It is complicated. Okay. It's sort of like dating in 2025. It's just complicated. And I'm thankful that I don't have to date in this calendar year. So where have I gone with this? Let's see. Zach Pitcher says, I have mug envy. Stop flaunting that beauty. I'll delete some of the words he just said. And actually, it's funny because this will be a great segue to the first user submitted question, which is from a good friend and former co-resident of mine, Dr. Zach Pitcher, who asks, importantly, Shannon, you can only fish for one type of fish for the rest of your life. What's your pick? And I'm going to
Uh,
surprise you with a photo real quick, and I hope this is the fish you're talking
uh-oh.
about.
That's funny. Yes, that is not the fish that I would pick, but that was a great catch. I would actually
Yep.
choose a cutthroat. So, and that's a rainbow. So, definitely a cutthroat up
A
in
cutthroat.
Montana.
We also have a
Yes.
dog in the background. Who's this dog? I see a dog right
Oh
there.
my goodness. Yes, I apologize. I was supposed to be out of town today, and so I had a dog sitter coming, and that didn't happen. So that is Marley.
Okay.
I'll
As
try to
long
cover her up.
as long as Marley does not use the bathroom in the back, and in fact,
You're fine.
if Marley does, it'll be better for television. So this is great. So let's jump into our next. Oh no, Zach actually had a real question too. The fish question,
Okay.
great, but he also had this question. He's asking: is clear aligner therapy becoming more or less popular for phase one treatment and or treatment for adolescents in general, or is clear aligner therapy staying the same, or maybe is it going in the other direction? What's your thought on that? Kind of
Oh, I think
looking at
it's
this.
definitely going up. I think that the market
Okay.
you can look at the quarterly reports that align and just Google it. You definitely see that it's got an uptick. I think 35% of aligners are now in adolescents. So, and with the palate expander and things like that, you're right. I mean, I do think there'll be more and more, but the difference between an ortho practice and a pediatric practice, we tried to help a few pedos hire orthos, and we don't do that anymore, but their offices are very different. I mean, I think orthodontists are really special, and I think this is just going to be the future is going to be a little bit different, as you do see increased competition and advanced technology. So it's not just left to the specialist, but I think people are going to have to start looking at state, legislation and even thinking about how can we protect our specialty at least with comprehensive care. But also just telling your story, like you said, I mean, letting people know that it's a different experience and that you're truly a specialist, and making sure that that TC on the front end is explaining to a patient, I know there might be cheaper options out there, let me tell you why we do it our way. And just letting people know, I don't think the general public has as high of an IQ in dental as we think they do. I have a doctor friend, and she had Invisalign on, and it was from her general dentist. And she goes, I didn't even know orthos really, you had to go to one for that. So it
Yeah.
really is surprising that people don't realize that you guys went to school for an extra 2 or 3 years to specialize in that. So I think the future generation is really going to have to tout that they're specialists, and they're really going to have to showcase that they do hard cases, and beautiful work, and clinical outcomes are important. It's not all about starting the patient, but it's about the journey, and making them have a beautiful smile at the end. You have to have great finishes, um,
Yeah,
to
no,
keep it
I agree.
going.
Well, a lot more that could be said about that. Let's shift into, let's see, section 2, key metrics, benchmarks, and industry standards. I love that there's little notes that this should take 8 minutes or this should take 6 minutes. No way. You wish.
That's funny.
Not when I'm involved. So one thing you're really well known for in your consulting work is helping practices track their KPIs, or their key performance indicators, and in a similar sense, understanding industry benchmarks. So what's normal, what should they be shooting for, and so on. How would you say that those benchmarks have shifted since, let's say, 2019? And then what should we be focused on as orthodontists KPI wise as we head into the new year?
Yeah, so I mean, I think some important, metrics, that really Gauge highlights on, and has really brought, a highlight to the industry for people to really understand what the benchmarks are, is, obviously, how many phone calls are you getting? And do those phone calls actually convert into an exam? And that should be a 90% range. And a lot of people, I think the industry average right now is about 80%. So that's kind of a leaky bucket that people can work on. Obviously, everyone's always looking at their production and their collections, but your case acceptance, I think a lot of people think that they have almost 100% conversion on adults, but a lot of people, it's like
Mm.
50%.
Yeah.
Your starts from observation, we've seen that trickle down. And that's been really interesting, to kind of watch. Typically, you want 20 to 25% of your starts to come from your obs bucket. But do you really have a good observation program, and really, are you following through on that? Because we're starting to see those numbers trickle down. And then again, your kept to new patient exam rate. I think this past year was really high again for no shows. Not everyone has advanced in technology where people get a text or a reminder, that they have an appointment. But if you're going to invest this year, those are the kind of things that I would look into, because that's kind of, consumerism drives change. And when you can track everything you do, like you can watch DoorDash, make your order, put it in a delivery cart, and drive to you. I mean, this is spilling over into what they expect in healthcare. So,
Yep.
all of those things. But, you have to find a way to, reach out and confirm those appointments, because it's crazy to me when you go to a practice and they might have 6 new patient exams that day and 2 don't show up. That's lost production that you're not going to get back. And maybe you could have moved and shifted your schedule around where you could have brought somebody in. So, and I think a lot of people honed in on some of those processes last year and got a lot better at it. But everyone should be looking at their metrics. And if you don't know how to pull that data, I would say reach out to us. We have instructions on most all practice management systems where, it can tell you where to find those numbers. You don't have to have Gauge to understand it, but you do need to know where in your software you can find those and pull it up accurately, and start putting some benchmark targets out there and making sure that you're meeting them. And even if you're your data is screwed up. A lot of people say, well, my data is not right. Well, your data should be right. And if it's not, you should clean it up. There's consultants out there that do that. But even if it's not right, start manually doing it if you have to, but understand those metrics for sure.
Yeah, that's great. I do think that's probably a commonality. You would know better than I do because I'm not a consultant, but just in conversations I have, and even myself included, is in the broader, business world, not mom and pop business world, but like true business world with administrative levels and, hierarchies and sophistication. The reviewing of data that's what you do. You set goals, you review it, you analyze it, you crunch numbers, you use spreadsheets, let's say. In our mom and pop kind of, really like lightweight business world generally, we've never been trained to do that. That is just not a standard thing that we do. Now we review cases and you trace Cephs and do all these like highly analytical things to get at how to approach a case. And great, we need to do good treatment. Sure, that's the technical aspect of what we do. But from the business aspect, the technical aspect of that, I feel like we are really not great at it. And I think we're only really able to not be great at it and still succeed because our margins are so good, because orthodontics is such a good
Right.
business. And
Okay.
and so and I'm judging myself by saying that. The three things you mentioned, unless I missed one on key metrics, and I think this is the big takeaway I want people to take, is it's all to do with communication. It is answering more phone calls. And I would add to that, there's a lot of good data about this. Scott Hansen from Lead Sigma has some good data, and I talk about this in some of this, that like 11% of all new patient calls never get answered. And then
That's
a big bulk
crazy.
of those only ever get one phone call. I mean, I can just speak for myself. My phone stays in do not disturb mode at all times. If I get a phone call from a number and they don't leave me a voicemail or text me, I will never reach out to them again. Never.
Right.
I don't have the time to be curious about what that might be. So if that was a doctor that I had submitted a form to, and that's all they ever did was call me one time, I would never connect with them,
Right.
which is crazy. And we're doing that. And so there should be a phone call, there should be a text, there should be an email, there should be everything in a very quick sense. It should be automated, really, or semi-automated at best, or at worst, to get into contact with them within 5 minutes. And then there should be multiple calls after the fact. And then at a certain point, you have to decide, well, they're not a good candidate. And yes, X them off the list because you don't want to waste time and effort. But that's a great one. And then phone calls starts from observation. We need to have a system by which we are regularly reaching out to these people and trying to basically fish in the ponds that we have stocked. And then you said
Yes.
kept new patient exam rate. I'm with you. I mean, there's people like there's me. Like if in 10 minutes I have not been reminded of something that I need to do, I will already have forgotten. And it's pretty
Right.
wild. And we're being kind of continuously programmed to need near constant reminders of things because we're so
Yes.
either
Agree.
ADHD or we're just so distracted. And because the other systems in our lives, we're relying on those things. That's a whole nother conversation we could go down into. I had this conversation, and I'll just share it with Dr. Nicole Wax, who's great. She's awesome. And she was just talking about her experience in healthcare and how easy it was to schedule and how easy it was to pay. And that in the kind of broader orthodontic space, that's not always the case. I'll share one quick thing. I scheduled 2 doctor's appointments today. It's a story of 2 very different experiences. One was a phone call where it took 3 minutes just to get through the initial menu. And then I had someone who was not great to deal with on the phone. And then I had one where I was able to do it online and I loved it. I actually kind of enjoyed the process. And so I do think we have to be realistic about if we are not the gatekeeper of patients, we have to get really good at that acquisition process. We have to make it really, really easy for people to schedule it. When they have this fleeting thought of, hey, I want this, we better make it really, really easy and up to the standard of something like Uber Eats or DoorDash, or we're going to lose them. So,
Oh, absolutely. I think people really, that phone call is your first touch. I mean, a lot of people think that they have something on their website where people can make appointments, but a lot of times, it's just an appointment request. And, those probably are handled better, but the phone calls, I mean, that's the first touch of someone calling and making that appointment, and it has to be perfect. I mean, your first impression a lot of times is your last impression. So if it's not handled well, they might not come in. But I think in the morning huddle or the afternoon huddle, whatever people do, I think you need to know how many new patients called our office today. and, start tracking, do we have, a 90% conversion, an 80% conversion? And if not, what's the disconnect there?
Yeah. And there's systems for all those things. And I know we don't want to have to pay for 18 different systems, but there is a point at which the holes in our bucket are leaking out too much. So it
Yes.
probably serves us to fill those. Tia Welsh, she is awesome, but she says that she texts the day before, calls the day of, and she still had more no-shows this year than any year before. It was crazy. I don't really have an answer for that other than I think people are just increasingly flaky as a general rule. But I think people also just sort of, when COVID happened, everything was sort of locked down, everything slowed down, and we all said, man, why were we so busy and why were we doing all those things? And then as soon as that let up, we just went back to doing all the same things and then more. I really think we are doing more now. So there was all the revenge vacations and all these sorts of things of like, well, I've always wanted to go to Europe. Let's go to Europe. I think some of that is responsible for some of the economic crunch, possibly. And I think we're just all maxed out and it's just hard to keep up with all the different things that we do. So we're doing it to
True.
ourselves. But all right, user submitted
I
question.
will add on to
Oh,
that
go ahead.
real quick. Just one
Yeah.
thing. A lot of people, if you're only sending a reminder and you're still having no shows, you need to think of a different approach. So I know that even when I make Marley an appointment at the groomer, I have to confirm the appointment. So yes or no. And if I don't confirm, they cancel it. So,
Yeah.
I think that people need to look into that. So a lot of times people think, well, we confirmed the appointment. Well, if all you did was send a text and you didn't get a reply, you didn't really confirm that appointment. And
Yeah, that's
so
fair.
I know people are afraid to make those changes to say, if you don't confirm your appointment, we're going to give your appointment to someone else. But at some point, if these trends don't change, you have to learn how to value that time or make adjustments on the schedule. If somebody didn't confirm an appointment, adjust the scheduling time.
Yeah.
So I do think there's, better ways to do it for sure.
Tia says, yes, we do that. They confirm. They still don't show.
Okay,
So
good.
I
Well,
don't know.
that's
You're doing
horrible. And yeah,
you're doing everything you
same.
can, my friend. I guess you
Right.
gotta get a bus and go pick them up or something. I don't know.
Well,
So
and again,
um,
back to the age-old thing. I mean, I used to work in medicine, and there is not a doctor you can go to for a free consult, right? So, I mean, no one's going to ever want to charge for that, but your time is valuable, and when you take up, an hour slot and somebody doesn't show up, it affects your practice.
yeah, I think that's a conversation for another day, but one that I think is important and that our industry, our profession, I should say, needs to have is the free consult thing. I
Yeah,
don't exactly get it. And
yeah.
I don't know. So maybe one day that will change. Maybe we'll try it out. We'll see. Anish says, I find the social media leads to be the most unreliable. Yes, for sure. And I think that's an even broader conversation about marketing and patient acquisition and it's a balance of all these factors. You want more patients who show up and who start, and if those are the low hanging fruit, and if you can hit your capacity with those, knock yourself out. Most people can't, and so there have to be some sources that are a little bit higher hanging fruit, as it were. And social media leads are not going to convert the highest, but they're better than nothing. To a point, right? And so to me, it's like, what systems can we put in place that optimize the picking of the lowest hanging fruit? If you're stretching beyond the low hanging fruit because you think it's a shinier fruit or whatever, that's stupid. You should focus on the low hanging fruit. I'm stretching that analogy to its length. We have Vijay says he hates free consultations. Renee says we need to charge for consults. I do and have very
Yeah.
low no shows. Good for you. Well, we have two people that are ahead of the curve on that. So
I do
there you go.
think female providers I see a lot more of them that actually have made that change and do charge for a consult. And if you start treatment, that charge goes towards your
Passes along.
treatment fee. So,
Yeah.
and
That's an
they don't have no
interesting
shows.
well, you wouldn't have a no-show or you have fewer no-shows for sure if you've paid. And like
Right.
everyone else does that. You can't get anything like time
No.
for free, so maybe we need to make that change. Again, maybe we will change that. I know I'm not a female provider, but I'll do my best. But no, I think that's a good conversation. I'd be interested to see, like, in the broader orthodontic space, what percentage of providers today charge for a consultation versus 5 years ago versus 10 years ago. And then, of course, in 5 years, what will that be? I'd have to assume that it's trended up, but it's still probably 3 or 4% at most. What do
Yeah,
you think?
it sounds like a polling question in the
Yeah,
group for me.
yeah,
But yeah, I would
it
probably
does.
say
Yeah,
probably less than 5%, but I would definitely do a poll on that because we don't have data on that. When you look at production, a lot of those, again, the people that do offer, that do charge, they put that towards their treatment fee. So
Yeah,
it ends up
makes all
coming
the
out
sense
and
in the
being
world.
the same.
Yeah, we
So
charge if they've missed their first. There's a fee to schedule that we take in advance to schedule their second, but we could probably move that goalpost. I don't know. For all the reasons that we're scared to change something like that,
right.
I don't know. It's probably fine to change it. So let's see. Renee says they need to have skin in the game. If it's free, it doesn't have value. I agree, and I also, on some level, disagree because the system has worked. Free consultations have worked. There's practices that produce all sorts of money with that model. But I don't think it's necessary, is what I would say. And Tia says she charges a fee only if they no show more than once. That's what we do. She has a dozen orthos around us that don't charge. I think that's the challenge, is just in a competitive market, the first to do that is tough. And then my wife said the same thing as Tia said, basically, but she said it first. Okay. Man, we have so many. This is like the thing everyone wanted to talk about. There's like all these comments coming in. Kayla says, I do think as an industry, we've made it so much simpler to schedule appointments and in turn easier to not show up. Well, okay. That's also true.
Agree.
Yeah.
What's funny about that is, I mean, I had 3 kids and they all wore braces. And I don't think I ever went to a practice thinking that it was a free consult um,
Mm,
until I
yeah.
got there.
Yeah.
I don't think people
It's
come in the
almost like
door
not talked
thinking this
about.
is going to
Yeah.
be free. I mean, it's like, oh, wait a minute, I'm
Mm.
not going to pay something today. So, yeah, I think it should be researched and thought about. But yes,
Well,
we'll
maybe
move
we'll
on.
start a groundswell by where consults are now charged for, and orthodontists will make millions in the next calendar year. Anish, which I'm going to segue into his user submitted question. Anish Gala, who went to dental school with me, is a good friend of mine, and then he's an orthodontist like I am. He said that his barber confirms and then charges if you don't show up. So even his
Yes.
barber does, but he probably goes to a really fancy barber because he has great hair. So he asked this question. He just recently did a startup and he said, what are the best metrics to gauge the health of a new startup? And on average, where should we aim to be in years 1, 2, 5, and beyond? And I know that's specific. Not everyone's done a startup, but let's spend a little time on that if you don't mind.
No, absolutely. We saw more startups in the last 2 years than we've ever seen, at least that I had ever noticed. And there's some great, startup consultants that answer these questions a lot better than me. But I think, it takes time to do a startup. It takes time to collect that fee. And if you're taking, lower, if you're taking a down payment of 10% and you produce 50,000 a month, you're only collecting 5. It takes time. It takes 18 months to really start rocking and rolling with that. You really need to focus on your conversion rate and your patient acquisition. When you don't buy a practice and you don't buy the goodwill, you're not in the same space where an orthodontist has always been. You kind of have a disadvantage. So you really have to network a lot more. Going to businesses, going to referrals, even going to pediatricians. I mean, there are a lot of ways to network out there. But I would focus on that and focus on conversions. I would, invest in team members. That's your, most important line item. And I wouldn't worry about building a Taj Mahal space. I mean, some of the biggest practices we see are 4 or 5 chairs. And they just really work it and they do a great job. So you have to watch all of the KPIs when you're doing a startup, but just understand it takes a little bit of time, but be available. Have somebody answer your phone all the time. And I think when you're doing a startup, I think that you have more time to put into the patient and to the referrals. I heard a great story from Dalen Featheringham at the SAO, and she was saying when she did her startup, she used to actually, go talk to the dentist in person. And they're like, we can't believe you're here. But she said, well, I'm the new guy in town. I'm the underdog and I have time to do this. But building
Yep.
relationships is key for sure.
Yeah, I think being willing to do the things that others either won't or can't is a huge key to differentiation. I did a
Yeah.
startup, and so there are a lot of things that I did that I now would never do. But thankfully, I don't have to. But I think anything you can do that creates scale for the interactions, and that, man, this I love talking about marketing like this because sure, Neon Canvas is digital marketing, all that kind of stuff. But there's a huge part of me that is focused on what are the core, I call them analog marketing systems, but old school marketing systems. It's basically relationship marketing and
Yeah.
networking what are the things you can do that create scale? And so it's, yes, you could have lunch with a dentist, but it would be better to have a lunch with the dentist and their team. It would be even better to have a lunch where you're showing slides on the treatment that you do and asking for referrals. And far better still, if you could do that for 5 offices or 10 offices or 50 offices at the same time, to a certain degree, the degree to which you can do that and create that awareness and those relationships will bolster a practice more than anything. Even in the age of general dentists doing more and more Invisalign, let's say, that is really the bread and butter. Even as things change, those things don't change, that they are low hanging fruit for patient acquisition. And then the thing you don't have going for you as a startup is you don't have access to internal marketing levers because you don't have patients. And so that's the real challenge. And so you have to look outside of the practice, as you alluded to, go out into the community, go out and meet dentists, serve them in ways and communicate with them in ways that they're not getting from other orthodontists. And I think digital marketing too is another great way, because on day one with digital marketing, you can tell a story just as loudly as someone down the street who's been there for 30, 40 years, which is a new thing. Didn't exist 15 years ago. So let's see. All right, Anish, I hope that
And
helps.
just to add on to that,
Yeah.
I would say, I think that you hit something perfect. I think so many people focus on the dentist, but when I go to the dentist, I see the dentist for like 30 seconds.
Yeah, sure.
I spend 45 minutes with the hygienist. So, as a startup, if you've gotten a couple of referrals from an office, I mean, nowadays you can DoorDash them lunch, you could rent a food truck and take it to their office. There's so many things you could do, but reward the team, not just the doctor. I think that's huge. And I think that people that focus on teams in pediatric and general practices do a lot better than just, taking the doctor to a football game or a basketball game or whatever. I think, the team is huge. I think we don't give teams enough credit.
Well, let me also add this wrinkle. As more and more dentists become associated with DSOs and organizations as such, the dentist may have a certain mandate of sorts to send to a certain orthodontist. We've seen that, but the team members will kind of do whatever they want.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we have found that there's team members that are like, yeah, we're supposed to send to so and so, but we send them to you. So, oh, okay, good. Well, don't tell your doctor. So I think it is to say that there are many relationships that are potential inside of a practice, and I would probably venture that the hygienist and the front desk admin teams are probably more important. But okay, let's get into this if we can. We're going to go into something you're very well known for: practice transitions, associateships, demographics. Sounds fun, doesn't it?
These are my
And
favorite.
this is supposed to be taking place at 8:21. It's 8:54.
Oh.
Look at us, but we don't have too much left. We have one more section after this, and we'll wrap up. But some good user generated questions. Let me do this, Anish. I want to do service to his question. He said, "Are there production numbers that should be a benchmark for startups at years 1, 2, and 5?" I know that's probably maybe broad, but
It is broad, and I would say, Anish, reach out to me. I do have some information I can share, but it's a little complicated. But yes, it totally depends on how many people are coming in the door. But there are some goals that you should hit, and kind of how that cash flow follows that. So if he wants to reach out, I'm happy to share that.
I mean, I'm sure he will. In my experience, it took, I don't know, a couple years to feel like I was even making money, and a couple more to feel like I was doing pretty well, you know? So, I mean, it takes a while. I mean, obviously, like that's one of the natures of financing treatment is it takes a while for the collections to catch up with the production. And
Yes,
that's why startup
absolutely.
stinks. And I wish I could have done anything else, but it was the only option available to us. And so we did it. But Anish, you're going to do great. Reach out to Shannon. I'm always here to help too. All right, let's get into this. As we've said already, and I think as people know by your reputation, you specialize in practice and career transitions. Let's talk about future provider demographics and the associateship landscape in 2025. There's a few questions here, but let's start with this. What are younger doctors seeking in an associateship or in a partnership these days? Anything different?
So yes, I think it's important to say that right now, we're graduating about 380 orthodontic residents a year out of 67 programs. And I would say 80% to 85% of them are taking employment positions. So this is huge. And 5 years ago, 60% were coming out and purchasing practices, and educational debt has really impacted. It's not, they can still get loans, but it's just scary to go out and borrow another $1 million when you have $500,000 in student debt. So, 2 years ago, we really saw associates chasing the money. They were really going um, to bigger practices, corporation, and really trying to get, as much money per day as they could. We have seen a shift, and we spend a lot of time in this demographic. This is our space. Shane, who works with us, all day, every day, he's talking to residents. So I think that in their first job, they really want, I think mentorship is way it's an overused term, but I think they want coaching. I mean, they've learned how to be a clinician, but they absolutely have not learned anything about selling cases and being the leader of a team and running a clinic. And they really want to be in a practice that's going to set them up for success, because even though 85% of them are taking employment jobs, 99% of them still want equity in a practice someday. So they certainly, still have that desire. So they want to learn, how to do that. And I think some people think, well, I want to hire somebody that's not going to leave. Well, you probably want to partner them, because an employee has choices, and most likely they're not going to want to be an employee forever. So I think, you have to be market value for the compensation. That has gone up. We don't know if that's going to go down. There's not near as many jobs right now as there was 18 months ago, or even this time last year. But you have to pay them, well, and you have to treat them well. And, your team has to treat them well, all of those things. They really are looking to join practices that are going to improve their skill set and help them be great orthodontists.
Okay. What about kind of the industry shifting into sort of a more female dominant demographic? Is that shaping practice dynamics in some ways?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you look at pediatric practices, so 72% of pediatric dentists are female, right? Or the residents are. How often do you go by a pediatric practice that, is one doctor in one solo location? Very rarely. They're certainly drawn to small group practices and partnerships. I think that they enjoy working with each other. They don't necessarily have that alpha job, but they enjoy a work-life balance and collaboration. I think that's a just in general a younger doctor mindset, but definitely more towards females. So I do think partnerships are going to be a big part of the future. I think that that we're going to see that probably pretty rapidly in the next 5 years.
Okay. And then here's the topic that always comes up: predictions as it affects all this transitions, associateships, demographics, corporate dentistry, OSO. What are some trends there that you're seeing last year and maybe coming into this year?
Yeah, absolutely. So corporate affiliations, not 2024, but 2022 and 2023, they were everywhere, right? Last year, there was definitely a slowdown. It seems like these groups have the funds, but they didn't make a ton of acquisitions this year. I think they're going to be a lot smarter in their practice acquisitions. I think that they are looking for doctor partners, not doctors that want to exit. So if you're thinking about a practice affiliation and that it's going to be easier and you're going to work less, that's probably not the case. You might not have to do that management piece anymore, but you might have to invest more time in the clinic. So, when you affiliate, they do want to help you grow that practice. So I think they're going to probably seek a different demographic of practice than what they sought in the past. They do want practices that are scalable and, have good team members and good doctor partners. But I do think that we'll see an uptick in mergers and acquisitions this year.
Okay. Yeah, it seems like there's going to be a shift to the joint venture model, which was,
Yes,
I guess, sort
that
of
has happened.
pioneered in some sense by MB2, and then Smile Doctors has
Yeah,
started doing it, and I'm guessing the rest of them will kind of
they
follow
are.
suit. Because I think there is going to be this sort of like ebb and flow where our legacy doctors from those initial, I'm going to call them sweetheart deals, where you sign on for 3 years, some of them, 5 years, a lot of them, 1 or 2 year non-compete. I think that's going to not be great for that model. But then,
Right.
they're going to wisen up to it and adjust for that. And like you said, try to get people who want to stay, who don't necessarily want the burden, let's say, of practice ownership, and who do want some of the synergies of being a part of a group. And that's not me. I mean, we've had these conversations on this show. I'm a private practice guy. It makes all the sense in the world for me that hey, you're going to put that work in, you're going to put 20, 30, 40 years into your greatest investment, and your greatest source of potential income, which is yourself and your practice. I think you should own it. But that's me. Doesn't apply to everyone. And so I'm interested, very curious to see in the next year to 5 to 10 years what that model does, how it morphs, how it changes. I mean, I know you hear all the horror stories. I have people come to me that are, I'm working for this DSO, this OSO, this whatever, and not everything is the same. Of course, it's not all apples to apples, but cutting pay, cutting benefits, making big changes. And so I do think these days of getting this like massive per diem are probably going to start to change. And so that is
Yes.
going to change the market in a lot of ways too. So we'll see. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, and I think, it's a very different mindset. I mean, the doctors that affiliated, and especially got, 80% or 70% or 60%, cash for their practice, they're pretty happy. A younger doctor comes in, and they don't have that same drive, if they don't own that practice, but they also hear, the staff saying things like, well, it didn't used to be like this before he,
Mhm.
affiliated or sold. They usually say the word sold. So, it is harder for the younger doctors. I think everybody's gotten better, at their employment model, but it just doesn't seem like, we're seeing people that younger doctors who want to be in that model necessarily forever. It seems like a lot of them still want to be, own in a private practice, or they, maybe have equity in one of those corporations. But it's certainly clear that young doctors want equity, 100%.
Yeah, it's just going to be interesting to me at what point you got the doctor who goes and works for, and I'm going to paint with a very broad brush here, but who works in a DSO, OSO as an employee effectively for 5 years making X amount. The degree to which it's then difficult to pivot into startup practice world it's
Yeah.
very hard. It's one thing to go from rice and beans to rice and beans. It's hard to go from, steak and lobster to rice and beans. But also to make that shift now into, okay, I'll be an associateship in a single owner doctor practice where I think I'll get a partnership opportunity. But what if 3 or 4 or 5 years into that they don't? And then what do they do? Now you're talking about, I'm 45 years old, so it's just, I always kind of tell people, like, if you're going to specialize, do it right out of dental school, because once you get out and you start making money, you're not going to want to go back in. And
Right.
I wonder how that will affect, the degree of practice ownership long term. And I think that is to the OSO's greater benefit, is to get someone started on this path of an employee mindset as opposed to an ownership mindset, because I do think it's different, and I see it in the way that
It is.
people talk about these things. So, okay, conversations for another day. Let's jump into our last topic, shall we?
Yes.
Because Shannon and I are bummed that we're not going to be at the spa tomorrow.
That's right.
We may not be anywhere tomorrow. We may not be flying, but we'll see. We'll see what Mother Nature decides. So let's go into predictions, because predictions are fun. We don't have a clue, but we're going to do our best. And I think it's easy to predict what's going to happen in this calendar year. I think, and we've sort of gotten at this in different ways. I think we're hopeful the
Yes.
economy is going to improve. I think we're hopeful that consumer spending behavior is going to tip back up, right? And then I think we should also be hopeful that we all increase our fees and find different ways to be more profitable and reduce margins, and we keep all our employees and they're all happy and great. So we'll work on that. But what happens in the next 5 to 10 years? So one thing that comes up, and I've talked to you about this a couple times, is declining birth rates. And tell me about that, how you think that's going to affect our industry.
It's funny. I talk about this a lot because I think it's going to make a little bit bigger impact than people realize. But the projection is, even from the White House briefing that was put out on demographics and budgets, this past year, 4.5. Primary and secondary grade schools are going to go down by 4.5% between 2021 and 2030. So it's coming. We really kind of started seeing that decline, heavier starting in 2014. We saw a little bit of a bump come back, but I think last year was the biggest decrease in birth rate that they've seen so far. So it will impact practices. And that's why I think people really have to wrap their head around being able to provide adult treatment, because I think in the future, adult treatment is going to be important. And there's some places might not feel the squeeze with having less children to treat, but other places will. So, you really do need to hone in on your demographics and understand, not just what it looks like now, but, what does it look like in, 5 years and 10 years, these populations, is your state, attracting residents and businesses to come there? Because, ortho is kind of a one and done service. It's not like you're treating the same person every 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So, if you live in an area, cost of living is important. That's going to impact areas. I mean, if somewhere is so unaffordable to live, I mean, are people with kids going to be moving there? So those are trends, if you're going to do a startup, if you're going to purchase a practice, or if you're going to, be doing a satellite, is look where there's affordable housing and where people are moving, because, that's America's dream, right? Everybody wants to have kids and own a house. So
Yep.
not everybody, but a lot of people. And that's kind of y'all's demographic, treating kids with crooked teeth and parents who can afford to pay for them. So definitely it's something that people should, be paying attention to.
Uh, I feel the need to share this because when I think of birth rate, I'm on Twitter and follow a lot of just different people, and me mentioning this person does not mean that I endorse all his thoughts. But Elon Musk, who's actually brought a lot of industry to Memphis, so I am grateful for that. But he says that a collapsing birth rate is the biggest danger civilization faces by far. He's on record saying that. And he's talked about it multiple times over the years, talked about how Japan will eventually cease to exist. I don't know if that's true, but
Mhm.
they have a very rapidly declining population. And then this is also fun. I didn't know this was a word, but pronatalist. That is to say that he thinks it's important to have as many babies as you can. Pronatalist. That's a new one for me. He's fathered at least 12 children. So I guess he's doing his
Oh,
best to help the underpopulation crisis. But anyway, there's some good ideas there. I wish people would have more kids and maybe not put off that part of their lives, but hey, to each their own. But it will have an effect on us for sure. And so I think probably the obvious takeaway as well, we need to seek to focus on adult treatment, retreatments, things like that, as we've sort of already talked about. So another thing, the Fed just cut interest rates in
yes,
December. I hope
yes.
this is good news, right?
Yes, I hope so too. Supposedly they're going to make some more this year. We'll see. But yes,
Okay.
so that was definitely a relief for people. And anybody, a lot of families are carrying credit card balances. I mean, some of those, the interest rate doesn't affect home mortgages and things like that, but it does affect, some credit card, debt and things like that. So hopefully that will help with people's, wallets a little bit. We'll see.
Yeah. Okay. Hopefully so. We need people to have more money. And let's see, just economy in general. I don't know if there's like any more meat we can put on these bones, but what do you kind of expect is going to happen in the next year or two or three? I want mostly good news, but if you have some bad news, that's okay too.
I think that this is going to be a great year. I think the first half of the year probably is going to be a little bit flat. So continue to work on, patient acquisition, getting people in. But I do think by this summer, we're going to feel some pent up demand. We definitely saw a little bit of a squeeze with not as many new patients coming in. So I do think, this summer, people that maybe waited last year or even the last 18 months, they'll come in. So I do think the back half of this year is going to be really good, and I think people will be really busy and get ready for that. Hone in on your processes and procedures. Make sure you're ready for those things. Make sure your TCs are following up. I mean, what's funny is there's so much money in our practices that you're missing. That you're really, work with what you have, and start trying. When you start looking for adult patients, start in your waiting room. I mean, start with mom
Yeah.
and dad. I think, some practices scan, the parent a lot of times and just, show them like if they have a smile simulator or whatever. But, those are great ideas. And, if you can just get, some of those to convert, that will help you out for sure. And I don't want the birth rate to be scary, but people do need to be aware, that it will impact the industry a little bit for sure.
I'm going to use an analogy because it's the way my mind works. I'm always looking for associations. But I was just in Escondido over the holiday with my wife's family, and we went to a taco place. It's called TJ's, and it stood for Tijuana. So it was Tijuana style tacos. And what I noticed is in a lot of like authentic Mexican taco shops, they use the whole animal. And so obviously we have our choice cuts of meat that we would eat. And they had this incredible pork spit meat. It was like nothing I've ever seen for those type of tacos. But then they also had at the very end of the line, you go up these different sections to order, your carne asada or your fancy stuff. And then they, at the end, they had like, your menudo, your intestines and your cabeza, your brain and your tongue and all that kind of stuff, which of course I had to try. I don't do the intestines. I don't like the intestines, but I had to try like the brain and all that stuff. And the point I'm getting around to is that people out of necessity, especially in food and different cuisines, they've learned how to use the whole animal. They've learned how to use everything. And you think back to like Native Americans, with the bison or the buffalo or whatever, like using everything, even down to like the fat and using it as oil and energy source. I think as orthodontists, to me, that is a source of the greater profitability in the face of whatever comes. There is so much meat left on the bones for us to create systems around, to optimize around, to use our human workforce to produce more from what we already have. And, I think if we do that, we'll be okay. I guess I'll end it with this. You have a lot of expertise in a lot of different things. It's hard to maybe generalize in this sense, but maybe what are a couple things that orthodontists can do starting today to improve and to help grow and position themselves for success? Like, what are some, kind of give us our last words of wisdom here before we end the night?
Absolutely. I think data is your friend. So if you're not tracking your data, this is the year to do it. Especially, if you're not as busy this month or next month, start looking at your KPIs and understanding where that data is and start following it. And really work on those systems. If your conversion rate is below 30%, you can work on that. If your new patient call to exam ratio is below 90%, you can work on that. It's not all about collections. You're only going to collect this year what you produced last year. So collections might not be as high as it was last year. So that, and then also, like you said, if you are comfortable and want to do some add-on services, you can do that. But think about smart marketing as well. I mean, when you go out and spend money on marketing in the community, do it smart ways. If you do a teacher appreciation lunch, make sure that there's someone there serving it. Things like that. There used to be a lot more involvement with orthodontists in the community, and we seem to have gotten away from that. Like orthos used to maybe donate a case to an auction, and now people say, well, that could be bad. It could be this or that kind of case. But, things like that, when you donate to like a school auction, the parents, especially the committees who put those things together, those are things that they remember. And, you benefit greatly from those things. So if you're going to market that way, just do it smart. Make sure that you're involved and not just throwing money out the window. And I think the back half of this year is going to be really busy. So it's a great time to get ready for that. I think this summer is going to be a great year.
Yeah.
Great summer.
Well, fortunately, I just looked like literally right before we got on. Our January is off to a great start, so we're trending above our goals. So that's good. Now that doesn't mean that will stay. We have up months and down months and so on. But another analogy I like to use is spinning plates, and there's so many different plates you can spin. Try to do your best to make sure that they're all spinning to the degree that you can control that, and maybe throw some new plates up there. But don't let the ones that are really important fall. So a lot more we could say. This is it's such a broad topic, but it's such a core and foundational topic. I don't do a ton of podcasts, for one thing, anymore that are like one-to-one, but also that are just like this focused on the stuff we do every day, like the bread and butter stuff. And probably this should start a trend or a tradition where we do this every year. We'll wrap up the year and we'll talk about trends and things like that or something. I don't know. So let's shift into the end. This has been great. Shannon, I appreciate it. We did go over on time, which always happens. I guess if people want to connect with you, and they should want to, when I have issues with a host of things, I reach out to you and to Chris, and you guys have always been great to me to help me, and I really do appreciate you. And you do it. Don't ask for anything in return, which is great. And I really appreciate that. Now, to anyone else who call in, they're going to ask for something in return. But no, how would people connect with you if they have follow-up questions? What's the best way?
Absolutely. They can reach out to my email. It's Shannon at bcp-advisors.com, or go to our website and you'll find all of our information. Benson Koppel Patterson and Associates, and reach out, and we'll help people any way we can.
Okay. Awesome.
And thanks for having me.
Yeah, and you guys are at like literally every meeting ever, and you're probably speaking at it. So just go catch
Yeah.
Shannon. You can't
Oh,
miss her.
there
So,
you are.
oh, did everyone else hear that? Your sound just got really weird at the very end. It sounded like a demon
You
took over.
went
Or maybe that.
out for a minute.
Oh man. Okay. Here, I'm gonna try to remove you and see if that fixes it. It would happen like at the very last second. We're down to the very end. Did anyone else hear that? Am I crazy? I have no idea. People are gonna tell me, yeah, I heard that too. So we've been possessed at the very end. Um, Let me wrap up and let me just say thank you to Shannon for sharing her expertise, Neon Canvas for sponsoring, and to all our live viewers and our non-live viewers. We love you too for tuning in. If you listen on Apple Podcasts or on YouTube, I would love it if you would subscribe, specifically on Apple Podcasts, the little 5-star review. If you want to give me one of those, it's really great. Don't give me a bad review. I don't want that. Stay tuned for our next episode. I have been wanting to do this debate on airway orthodontics forever. And to be honest, it's a big, hairy topic. And I've tried to do as much research as I can, but I think I'm ready. So that should be what happens next in terms of episode. I want to do 2 or 3 episodes on airway orthodontics and debate that and make it fair and hopefully something you'll enjoy and learn a lot from. But until then, until the next time that I see you, I'll let you know if I make it to Dallas. Who knows? We'll see. But from all of us here at the Digital Orthodontist Live, I'm Dr. Kyle Fagala signing off. Have a great night. We'll see you guys very, very soon. And if I can find my outro music, I'll play it now. Have a great night. Thank you, Shannon. Bye, guys.